All right, so welcome everyone to today's SAP TechEd workshop in the community. My name is Helena Lozada and I am part of the SAP Community team, and I'll be your host for today's call. Our topic of this session today is building cloud-native extensions for SAP solutions based on Kubernetes. And we have our speakers on the line who will present themselves afterwards. We're going to record this session so you can rewatch it at any time. And we're gonna make the recording available via the SAP community website. If you are new to the community, we have a tutorial to help you get familiar with the platform. Otherwise, please make sure to follow the SAP TechEd tag or the SAP Cloud Platform tag for the latest updates. If you have any questions during the call, please make sure to use the chat or the Q&A box to submit your questions. Now over to you, Marco.
All right, thank you very much, and welcome as well from our side, from the Keema team. So what we will do is we will do a quick introduction to the topic, like what's Keema all about, how is it positioned inside the SAP Cloud Platform, and then I will summarize as well what the goal of the tutorial is going to be about, or actually of the mission. So we have summarized it on GitHub. I will post the link then to the GitHub repository, which we use as well for TechEd in the chat at that given point in time. But you can always find the information as well afterwards. We have it as well in the tutorial navigator and all these things. So you can always go back to the content at any point in time in the future. I'll quickly summarize where Keema is coming from, like where you can find it, like from the messaging perspective inside Cloud Platform. Some pieces might be future looking if I summarize it, so that's why I included the disclaimer here in the slides. But don't worry, everything that you are going to use and what you're going to experience in the tutorial is part of the Cloud Platform trial and as well of the productive version. So our or your online support team here in the session is going to be Gaurav, who will join at a later point in time, but he will be there to answer any questions. Then Jamie, who's going to walk through the tutorial here in the main room, which means if you're not yet experienced with regards to Kubernetes and maybe you start, but then at some point it gets a bit overwhelming, for example, then you can just listen in to Jamie walking through the tutorial step by step throughout this 2 hours. And then we've got Art Perry and Daniel Roth as well here in the session, so that if you have any questions, if you have any problems, then you can just post them into the chat or into the Q&A, as Helena said, and then either we try to answer them in the chat itself, or we open a breakout room and take it offline, and then as well can help you by, for example, enabling you to share your screen and so on and so forth. So just to start to put Keema Runtime into perspective, I mean, I want to start at the very top. So this is the main two stories for Cloud Platform are, of course, the integration between SAP and non-SAP products, so the integration suite, and then the extension suite. And as the name of the extension suite already says, you want to build cloud native or ABAP-based extensions to SAP solutions, or you want to build and deploy a complete application into Cloud Platform, which is then enriching the overall SAP scenarios. And for that, I mean, you need a suite of different tools, and one key part is actually the runtimes part. So at some point, if you build something, you want to execute it, you want to run it somewhere. And for that, the Cloud Platform and the extension suite, they offer different technologies on how or where you can run your extension or your application. And that's exactly where the Keema Runtime is part of. So with the Keema Runtime, we want to enable the cloud native developer to deploy microservices which are running in Docker containers into Cloud Platform, and then interact with the different Cloud Platform services and as well with SAP solutions. So with that, and particularly with the side-by-side extensibility in general, we want to provide you with flexibility by like building an event-based architecture, which is only using APIs to talk to the solutions. You get independent of core applications that you might want to extend, like LOB applications or the back office applications. So you get independent of their release cycles, and you get as well independent of the programming languages and technologies which are used inside those applications. So for example, within the Keema runtime, I mean, as everything is based on microservices, you can use more or less any programming language that you want to, as long as you can containerize it and then deploy it into Kubernetes. So it will be consumable as well within Keema. And with that, the feedback is that like from those customers and partners that are already experienced with it, that you really gain efficiency because of the independence of the technology, because of the fast way of deploying new versions of a container into Keema and right away making it available in production, for example. They really see an increase in speed and as well efficiency. So with the Keema runtime, you get a fully managed Kubernetes environment on top of which includes as well additional services or components, so that you can make use of those inside the cloud platform environment and as well in combination with SAP solutions. And with the service, of course, you get the normal SAP enterprise support. You get the normal SAP SLAs for the cloud platform, and you can easily make use of cloud platform services and as well consume services from the hyperscalers via so-called service brokers. So what's inside the cloud platform Keema runtime? There's a service mesh built in, because you want to make those services that you deploy into Keema to talk to each other. So we use something which is called Istio to do the proxying and the service-to-service communication to steer that. We've got as well an editor in there for serverless functions. So especially if you want to combine functions and as well microservices, it's easy to do that within the Keema runtime. And you can actually use Node.js and Python as well to build those functions. There's an eventing built in, which means you can react to events coming from the connected applications. And then do something like execute a function or execute trigger functionality, which is containerized and which is built as a microservice based on an event that is coming from a connected application. If you want to then expose again the functionality that you deploy into Keema, you need an API gateway, as all functionality within Kubernetes within a cluster is shielded from the outside world. We built in an API gateway into the Keema runtime so that you can expose that API and you will see it as well and experience this as well inside the tutorials. And then there's a service catalog in which you can discover all the solutions which are connected to the Keema runtime, and as well the services which you can consume, for example, from Cloud Platform, so that you only have to worry about instantiation and therefore credentials once, and then afterwards you can, or your development teams, they can simply consume those services inside the Keema runtime, either from a function or from a service. And then, as I already said, there's a way to connect SAP applications. So a set of applications already at this point in time to be able to directly see the events they are emitting and as well the APIs they are providing. And then it's all built on open source because we try to use as many open source projects as there are, and that makes sense in the Keema context as part of the runtime. And then Keema itself, with everything that we build on top, and as well with the glue, which puts all those components together, is as well open source in itself. So we take the open source project keema-project.io and then wrap it up in the runtime as part of Cloud Platform, included in the domain model and everything of Cloud Platform, and then make it available as a service. So everything which is like highlighted here with a cross is what we're going to touch in the tutorials that we're focusing on today. There's more to be found in the tutorial navigator already about Keema, but this really gives you a good end-to-end picture about what you can do with Keema and using different technologies and as well exposing functionality and connecting an application or mocking an application being connected actually in this case. So The goal is that there are 3 tutorials or 3 exercises you would walk through. Like if so, if you get through those, that's then like we consider this being like already like done with the hands-on session. One is to deploy an MS SQL database in a container, then making it available via a Go-based application. So exposing it via an API and then talking to the database, consuming the database. And then afterwards, adding a UI5 frontend on top of this so that it's easier to talk to the app and therefore add data or read data from that database. If you're done with this already very quickly, you can as well do the next 2 steps, which is then to deploy a mocking framework, with which you can then fake that there is an application connected. In this case, it's an SAP Commerce Cloud application, which means that it will show up like a connected real application, like a real tenant. So it provides APIs and events, or the metadata, and you can as well from that framework send an event to the Keema runtime, to the event bus, and then react to this by calling back an API and getting like a default reply of that framework, but nevertheless you get a reply as if an application is connected. And then the last step is really to execute this, like to trigger this event, call back the API, and then save data from that in the database. So then you would really have an end-to-end flow from an mocked but still SAP application going into the database, and with the UI5 frontend, you can read that information. So the tools, I think, and this was as well sent like in the introduction email, I mean, the tools you would need, of course, is a Keema runtime, a deployed Keema runtime in your, for example, in your Cloud Platform trial account. You can as well use any other Keema runtime in Cloud Platform that you have, for example, via a Cloud Platform Enterprise agreement. But just be aware that deploying or enabling the Keema runtime inside Cloud Platform, doesn't matter if it's trial or not trial, takes some time, so like 30 to 60 minutes. So therefore, if you didn't yet deploy the Keema runtime, please let us know, like via the chat, because then we would take you like separate in a breakout room and grant you access to one of the runtimes that we provisioned before the session. So we are going to remove them right after the session, but then at least you can follow the tutorials. We just need to provide you access. And then there are the different frameworks here, or the different tools that you need in those steps. So I hope you had a look up front, or I mean, installing those shouldn't take too long as you have admin rights to your computer. And then you can make use, like full use of the tutorials. And again, Jamie is going to walk through those tutorials here in the main room as well. So if you're stuck at some point or you just want to listen in, you can do that as well here directly in the main room. All right, so this is just the more information from the TechEd, but nevertheless, I wanted to list those related sessions as they are recorded, so you can find them on the TechEd page, and then links to, I think nowadays it's YouTube, or even on the TechEd page, you can still find those. Have a look, like listen to those lectures that were recorded for TechEd for beginning of December, so the content is still quite recent. So this means at this point, I will quickly post the link to the GitHub tutorial. So what you will find there is, yeah, here we go. So you will find there, like again, a little description. I linked as well the slides which I used at the TechEd, so you can, it's pretty much the same content like right now. You can find the description and then as well the requirements, and as well how to deploy the trial account and the CPEA based account and so on, links to the different tools which are needed, and then it goes right into the exercises, which means from there on you would then go to those tutorials which Jamie will show here as well in the main room, but again you can just execute them as well on your own. Okay, so at this point I would stop talking, and again, let us know if you don't have a Keema runtime available at this point, so that we can grant you access. And then besides that, I would hand it over now to Jamie. Again, everybody can just walk through the tutorial on your own. ask us any question in the meantime here in the chat. We can take it offline in a breakout room. And then, yeah, I would just hand over to you, Jamie, to get started.
Does anybody need a system? Maybe we should just do that, try to do that real quick before I start walking through everything, just so that that person or people can follow.
Okay.
So maybe if you want to put in the chat, give a minute for that.
Okay, so I can see Madhu needs access. Daniel, could you grant access to one of the clusters, or well, I can do that as well, actually. Not a problem. Let me just do it. I know where to find them, maybe a bit faster. Okay, so what I would do, Madhu, is create, go to a breakout room and then get you into one of the runtimes that we created up front. Again, for everybody else, let us know as well in between if anybody needs access to that as well.
Should I wait a minute, or do you want me to just?
No, you can just get started. I guess like you're anyway faster than somebody who would do it for the first time, I'm pretty sure.
I've done it a couple times. You can see my screen.
You wrote them, you created them, so I
Yes,
guess you're
I know.
faster.
You do see my screen now? Just
Yes. So now the question just is, how can I get? Here we go. I will join the room as well. All right, go ahead.
Okay, so I have the Git repo open, and I have I'm going to open up a Keema instance as well, and I'm going to be just showing this stuff in VS Code. So let me switch back to here. So the first thing, you obviously need your Keema instance, but the first thing that you're going to do is to download a kube config from it. And I'm just going to set, actually, let me go back here. Just going to set my kube config value, so I know I have access to my Kubernetes instance, and I can confirm that by typing in kubectl config get context. And you can see here it outputs the cluster domain that's matching this one. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the first exercise here. And I'm going to start going through that. So the first thing that you're going to notice that it's going to point you to another Git repo. So if you have Git installed, you can clone it. Or you also have the option to navigate to the page and choose the code button. And you can download a zip file containing all the content. And then you would want to extract that somewhere. So you can see here I'm showing the contents of that repository in VS Code. So I already have that set up. So the first step 2 is just telling you to explore the sample. So we're looking at this database MS SQL one. And if you expand that folder, you'll see a README that provides you some information about what's contained in here as well. So you could read through that if you like. If we just take a quick peek here in this app directory, we have a couple of different files. I'll come back to that in a second. So first, I'll show you the Docker file. So the Docker file is what we're using to create the Docker image, which would then be deployed on our Kubernetes instance and for Keema here. And there's just a couple commands. So it's going to take an image from this MS SQL Server Linux image, and then it's just going to set up a directory and copy some contents there. It's going to change one permission on a file, expose a port, and then it's going to run this command which has this entry point .sh file here. So coming back in the app here, you'll see that file here as well. And what that's going to do is it's going to call this initdb file, and it's going to start the SQL Server itself. So while that starts, what it's going to do, it's going to wait for a minute to give it some time to start. And then it's going to run this command to basically log into the master database and then run this setup.sql. And what the setup SQL is going to do is create a database called DemoDB, and then create a table called orders, and then insert 2 records into that table here, just so we have some sample data already pre-populated into the database here. And then you also find a K8S folder here with a couple different files here. So you'll see the deployment, and this just contains the deployment definition for the image that we will create. You'll see that this is pointing to my Docker registry. So you can use this, but you probably want to use your own. But if you don't have one at this time, you can use mine. And it also has a service. And what the service does is just exposes this image to other resources running inside the cluster. So this is just local service communication, basically. And you'll see here it has a volume mount and a volume. So what this is really doing is just giving us file storage for our database. So in the case that the image, when it's running in our Keema runtime, in case that it restarts, all the contents of the database are stored outside of the image onto a persistent volume. And this is how you would define a persistent volume. So you can see we define a persistent volume claim called MSSQL with a MSSQL-data, and we name that here, and then the volume mount is using that name and then mounting it to this path. So then the database will read the information from this path. And if we take a look at that, it's pretty simple. Just a persistent volume claim as a name, and then we just set the storage amount to be 100 megabytes. And we also have a secret here, and the secret just has the database credentials here, and they're base64 encoded. So you see the username and the password. I have them in a comment above it, just for your reference. And really that's the contents of this sample. So let's move on to step 3. So build the Docker image. You can see here we already have the command. It tells you to enter in your Docker ID here. So I'm going to copy that command. I'm going to change my directory here to this folder. Put this command in here. And I'm going to change it to my Docker ID. And this is just going to build the image locally for me in case I didn't have it already. And that's based on this Docker file that I have defined in here. So you can see it just outputted some logs here. So that command is completed. Now I can go ahead and push it to my account. This isn't going to work for you using my ID, so you would have to push this to your own Docker repository. So what this is going to do is actually put it on my Docker Hub account on the internet. So in the case that when I deploy this, these resources to my Keema runtime, it can then pull it back down from that repository. So usually this is a little faster than that, but you can see that it's preparing and now it's waiting. So I don't know why it's waiting. So give that a second. I have blocking it. There it goes. This may be the slowest I've ever seen it run. But I already have it up there, so I'm gonna just cancel that. It's already in place, so it's fine for me, but in your case, you're gonna have to wait for that to run to get it if you never push that up to your own repository. So now we're gonna walk through the steps of how you would use this image locally. So I'm gonna copy this first command and paste that. And get rid of this notification. Sorry about that. So this just outputs some random string here. You can run docker.ps to see your images that are running. And I named this image SQL1. So you can reference it by name. If you don't name it, you can reference it by the container ID. So you'll see in these commands, I use the name here, the SQL1. So what I'll do is copy this next command. So this is running on my local machine right now. So if I run this, I'm gonna run a command into this image. And you can see I get a prompt back. So now this prompt is running in the image. So if I just do a list directory, you can see those files that are in the app. They're running on this image itself. And if I go to the next command here, so there's this tool SQL command that I can run on this image. And you'll see I just get another a prompt. And if you look at the next set of commands, I'm going to tell it to use this demo DB. And then I'll just copy this and I have to type it. So I'm going to do a select statement on that orders table and click go. And you're going to see that you get the two records that were created when this image was initialized. So if you do this a little too fast, you might not get anything back, or it might tell you that the demo DB doesn't exist. And that's just because it just hasn't completed running through these the tasks for at that point. So you just got to wait a minute or so. So now I'm going to just exit out of this, and you'll see the exit, and then I'm going to exit again to get out of this out of the image itself, and then you'll see some other commands here to stop it. I just use docker stop, and I use the name. If I didn't name it, I would use that container ID. And if you wanted to start it back up, you could do the same thing. You could, just do the docker start, use the name. And if you want to remove that image, you can use the rm command here. So it's kind of up to you what you want to do in that case. So I'll remove this image for now. And then, so the next thing I'm going to do is apply these resources to the Keema runtime. So you'll see it talks about the different resources. We kind of reviewed them in the content itself. So the secret, the persistent volume claim, and then the deployment. So we can start by creating a namespace. So you can choose to create this using the kubectl command, or you can come into your Keema runtime itself and choose add namespace and provide the name. So either way, it's the same thing here. So it's up to you how you want to do it. So I have my namespace, and the first thing I'm going to do is apply this persistent volume claim. So if you take a look at the command, what it's doing is using kubectl to apply a resource in this namespace, and we apply it by a file path. It seems my internet is a little slow at this point. So that created, so now I'm going to create the secret, which has the database user and password in it. And then I'm going to apply the deployment, which is pointing to the image. So if you pushed your own image to your own Docker account here, so what you would want to do is come to the deployment and find this image. It's on line 20 for me, and change this to your ID and save it, and then you can go ahead and apply it, and it will apply your version of the image. And this will take a second, but if you came onto your Keema, expand all these. If you came into your Keema environment in your dev namespace, you should see your deployment show up in a second. So you can see there here that it created it, the deployment and the service. But obviously, I'm having some internet issues here. So I'll just come back to that in a moment. Got some let me see if I can refresh this. There's something up with my network, but so let me move on. So next command here is just to check if the pods are, or the pod is up and running. You can see that's initializing. So this status will change a little bit. And this command is just a shortcut, so you could actually type pods as well. I'll give you the same output. And so what you're looking for is this ready to be running. As you can see here, that it changed from initializing to running. And so we're done that step. So we can now move on to how I could access this deployment of MS SQL on my local machine here. So this first command, I already know what the port is, but if you wanted to know what the port of the deployment is itself, you could run this command here. So I'm going to copy that, and actually I got to change something here. I forgot that this is referencing, you can see in here, it's referencing the pod name. So this pod name is not going to be the same as what's on my machine. So it's going to be the same case for you, that you're going to have to modify this value as well. So if I typed in kubectl, another thing you can do is set up autocomplete. So if I specify the namespace first, and then do get pod, and just start typing that, and type, hit the tab key, you see it will complete that for me. And then I'll just copy the rest of the command in. And you can see that reports back to me 1433. And what I can do here is there's this port forward feature in kubectl that you can use to make any of the resources running in your Kubernetes or Keema environment, make them available to you locally. So I could do the same thing, just specify the namespace first, and then do port forward and specify the pod, and then I'm using the ports. So I'm going to run it, I'm going to forward it to port 1433 on my machine, as well as and then reference the port that's running on the deployment itself. And you should see something similar to this, where it's forwarding the ports. Then I have a tool on my computer to use this at this point, but what we're going to do is use this on the next exercise here. So there's a question here if you want to answer that. So what was the command used? So we just used the port forward command to allow the accesses to the resources on the runtime locally. So I'm just going to go ahead and quit that command, and I'm going to move on to step 7. And same thing here, we can just look at some of the different commands of kubectl to look at the deployment here. So we have this describe command here. So do the namespace, I'm going to do describe pod ms, let it auto complete for me. And you can see this outputs a whole bunch of different things about the pod. The pod actually has a couple different containers in it. So you have a container containing the MS SQL database, and you also have a container that is used for Istio, which is this Istio proxy. So all your requests are proxied through this prior to it hitting your actual MS SQL image. And the reason that that is done is because Istio has a secure communication set up using MTLS. So all the communication inside of your cluster is encrypted between every pod. And this is set up by default, but it is something that you can turn off on when you're deploying stuff. So it's up to you, but it's turned on by default, and it's it's the best practice way to do things. But you can just see some of the different information about what's going on. So you see we have the volume. You can see when I start at the pod what all the different events that happen. So you can see that it's scheduled the pod to one of the nodes. The nodes start with the shoot.Keema, and then it just did various things. It's set up an initializing container, this Istio init, which does some stuff for the network. And then it pulled my image and created it, and then created the proxy container. So you just see a whole bunch of the different things. So if you have a problem with what happened during your deployment, this is a good first place to take a look at the different events, as well as you also have access to the logs as well. And then, so this next command here is going to show you how you would get access into the pod itself. So I'll just type this out. So I would do the kubectl. I typed that wrong. Specify the namespace. So I'm going to execute command into this pod. And so I specify the pod, and then this -c is the container inside the pod that I'm referencing. So that's called MS SQL. And then I want to run a bash shell. So you see, kind of similar to when we ran the Docker image locally, we get the prompt, and then I could do the same types of stuff where I could reference the SQL command. So if I did this, I would get that command to, or I could do the use demo db, and then select star orders, go to the same thing. So this is the same exact commands that I'm running, that I ran before when I was running this image locally, but now I'm running them inside of the Keema cluster itself. So then I can exit and exit again. So it looks like I have to get this link fixed, but it would take you back to step 4 to run those commands as well. So that completes this tutorial. So maybe we can take a pause here and see if we have any questions, or if anybody's running into any issues. So you can feel free to unmute yourself and talk, or just put something in the chat. So it seems pretty quiet. You guys seen any activity? Anybody running into issues?
Nope. So far, the feedback is that many are listening to what you're doing, and then we'll run through it later on. So to first understand what you're explaining, and then experience it on their own afterwards.
Okay. So let me take a step back and see how my internet's doing. So you can see that the deployment showed up. The status is not accurate at this point, but so you see here the deployment has one pod. It's been running for 10 minutes. It's using my image. I can see, I can obviously delete it here. I can also see what the deployment itself was. So that would show me this deployment file, this deployment.yaml. I could see that here. So it has, you'll see some additional information. So when I apply this, it's going to add some additional metadata, such as like when it was created and how many times it's been generated. And you'll see like the last applied version of it. And then you'll see all the properties that I have as well. And some of the information about the status and stuff like that, similar to what the describe shows us. And you'll see the pod that's running. Some status information, so there wasn't any restarts. If I want to look at the logs, I can look at them directly here as well. Not so sure why my internet is so slow. Maybe I should go back here and open this next tutorial before. Okay, so this would show us the logs, but I'm sure you get the ID, and you can edit these directly here, and same thing with delete. We also applied a service. So let's see if we can get the services to show. Is this Marco, if you click on this system, is it any better for you, or is this just me, my internet's having some issues?
Give me a second. No, it's actually quite fast for me.
Maybe I should.
Can I ask a quick question? Sorry, while we're waiting for the
Sure. Yes, of course. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. So you've mentioned cluster, node, pod, and container.
Yep.
Can you just explain how they all fit together?
So Keema, the Keema runtime is a Kubernetes cluster, and basically what a Kubernetes cluster is there's like a management or a control plane that's controlling virtual machines that schedules how things are running on those virtual machines. So when you first set up your Keema runtime, so when you come into your sub account and you enable Keema, what it's going to do is provision you a Kubernetes cluster with 3 different nodes. So as I said, those nodes are virtual machines, and it's going to install the Kubernetes related stuff. So the Kubernetes manages how all the operations and everything for you. And then the Keema components are going to be installed on top of that, which gives you, like this UI and like a bunch of the features of Keema and Istio and that kind of stuff. So then you have the cluster running, and it already has stuff installed on there for you that's in like system namespaces. What you're looking at here are like your user namespaces. So then I want to, so far all we've done is just set up a MS SQL instance to run on our Kubernetes cluster. And so that's basically you define that by a deployment. In our case, we're using a deployment. So I'm telling it to set up this deployment with my MS SQL image. And the deployment is like a desired state. So there's all these different properties that you can use in here. So we have like replicas. And so that's how many of these, in this case, pods are running. I'll get to that in a second. So I just have one running. I could set it to 2 or 3 or whatever I want it to do. And then I could set it to have auto scaling capabilities based on resource usage. But so I just have a pretty basic scenario here of just getting one deployment of my MS SQL to run. So then when I'm deploying it, what it does is it creates a pod for me and puts my MS SQL instance inside of that pod. So that's considered a container. And you could have any number of containers existing inside of a pod.
Oh, okay.
So as I mentioned when you first,
that was going to be the next question. I mean, is one pod equal one container? But you just said yourself you can have multiple containers in one pod.
Yes, and because I mentioned that we're using Istio here, so Istio is encrypting the traffic between, so you can have pod-to-pod communication, but that traffic is encrypted using Istio. So that way, when I deploy something, in this case, it's MS SQL, it's going to actually put another container in there for the Istio proxy, which handles that communication. So any communication that comes into this pod, it goes to Istio proxy, and then the proxy forwards it to, in this case, MS SQL. But you could have, as I mentioned, you could have a number of containers existing in there. And I also mentioned you can disable that as well if you want. But you see there's like a label here. So this TLS mode equals Istio. So there's a label that you can use to turn this off. So labels can control a lot of stuff inside of Kubernetes, and things like that's how like logging works and stuff like that. But you can use labels to turn things on and off as well. I hope that makes sense. It's probably
okay. So to summarize, what you've just done is you've just created an MSQL container inside a pod, which is in one of your 2 nodes in a cluster.
I have 3 nodes. So Kubernetes is managing the resources on those nodes. So there's like a control plane layer that schedules what should go where. And so depending on if one of my nodes has not enough resources, it's going to know to put it somewhere else, right? And then at some case, your 3 nodes, as you keep applying more deployments, Kubernetes will know I don't have enough resources. Now I'm going to start another node. So we'll just keep scaling up or scaling down depending on what your need is. And a lot of that stuff is happening automatically for you. So you don't actually have to worry about doing it. But maybe after we go through all the exercises, we can just show a presentation that kind of gives you the visualize how that is. So maybe like Daniel or
yeah,
Mark,
that'd be great. I just thought I'd ask a question just to do some. I just thought I'd ask a question just to fill in some time while your internet speed up a bit.
I appreciate that. Okay, so just a little more quick review. So we applied the deployment, the service. We also put the secret here. So you'll see the MS SQL secret. I can click on that and I can see the data here. I can decode that. The persistent volume claim, you don't see that. And that's basically all that we applied so far. So let's get looking at this next exercise. So this is exercise 2 in the list here. I already opened it. So it's just going to give you some basic information, tell you to look at the Git repository again. And then we're going to start exploring. We're going to start at step 2 for explore the sample. So this is the API MS SQL-go. So I'm going to come back to VS Code. I'm going to clear this. I'm going to change my path and minimize this and close that. And so same thing, all these directories, we're only referencing a couple in this tutorial here, but there's a whole bunch of different samples, and everyone has its own README, so you can read through that again, as I mentioned before. So this is a Golang application. And so there's a couple folders that are specific to that. So the first one is this command API main.go. So all this is doing is just setting up a couple endpoints in here for like a API REST-based service. So you can see we have orders URL. We also have an order code event, which we'll use in the extra or the additional content or the bonus content. I forgot what Mark called it, but you'll see there's a couple different functions that would be called depending on what the path and what HTTP method you're using. So we see this is referencing something called API server. So that's existing in this internal API. So this is other folder internal. Let me minimize these. API, and we have a server and we have events. We're really interested in the server right now. So see a couple different functions in here. So like the get order or the get orders. And basically what they do is just, they're going to call another function that is connected to the database and basically going to query the database and then return that content to you in JSON. And so additionally, when this starts, there's some configuration parameters in here. So you'll see there's config.go. There's a couple parameters defined in here that get initialized through the environment configuration. And then we have this database folder, which has one file in here that sets up the connection. So using those config properties, we build a connection string. And then we basically just open a connection to that database. And we have another function that will basically just return your connection by checking if we can do a ping. And if we can't do a ping, it will fail. And in this case, this failure will cause the pod to restart. So there's, in Kubernetes, there's also this health check that's always going on. So if you fail something, the pod will automatically restart to try to get it back into a working state for you. And then finally, we just have the order file here, and this is just running the different queries that we have. So we have like the get order. So this just builds a string and then calls the query function, which is down here. And it just gets the connection and logs out some output and then runs the query and then returns the results. There's also an execute function, which is if you're doing like an insert or something like that. And additionally, so that's really the Golang code. There's also this Go mod. So these are the different modules that we're using in this sample. And Go sum, which is just, I don't know how well I could explain this, but it's just all the related resources and then a hash to basically secure it. So just to make sure you're not using anything that's may have been corrupted or has some like security flaw in it or something like that. And then we also have the Docker file. So we're going to build another Docker image. And what this one does is it takes the base Golang image for 1.14. It turns Go modules on, sets up a work directory, copies some files, does a Go mod download, which will get all the module resources, and then copies them into these two folders. And then it's going to basically just build the application. And then you're going to see what we do is move the application into this Scratch Docker image, which the Scratch Docker image is like a really slimmed down baseline image that really has nothing in it. And the reason really why you would use this is just because of you don't have to worry as much about it with like security updates or scanning the image for any type of flaws that may exist in it. So it's basically like the smallest image that you could possibly use for Docker, which makes your life a little easier because of any type of security incidents that could come into play here. So you could disable this if you want. When you're using Scratch, you can't really do much on it, like where we were using that execute command to get access into the image. A lot of the base features of like a shell or like a bash command are not there. So, I just kind of did this just to kind of give you a little more taste of what you can do. So basically just copy the folder into there and then start it, expose a port and then start it. And let's see, so then we just have the Kubernetes resources. So in this case, we're going to create an API role, which we'll get into in a bit. Config map. The config map holds the different values for the how to connect to the database. So this is the API for the database. And you're going to see here that it's going to reference it by this path. So we have this host property, and the value is the MS SQL, which is the service name, and then dev, which is the namespace. So if you're doing this in a different namespace, you would have to change this dev to whatever you called your namespace. And then this is just the rest of the fully qualified name. And then the port. We're not going to use the service binding at this point. So we use the deployment here. So this is similar to the one for MS SQL, where we just provide some name values, the image. Once again, if you're not using my image, you want to change this value to your Docker account ID. And then you'll find in here setting how you set environment variables. So these are pulling from a config map. So you see config map ref, and then the name and the key. See a whole bunch of them. And you also find a reference to a secret key. So this is where the user and password for the database come from. And then once again, we just have a service. And we have the secret here defined again, in case you didn't already apply it, but we don't need it at this point. And so that's the content we're going to be using right now in this this part of the tutorial here. So let me just scroll down a little bit. So this will show you how to run it locally. So you can just copy these parameters and paste them in here. And then I can hit this go. I'm in the right file, so I can just do go run. And this is going to start my application. You see, you get a little message about it, my firewall allowing it. And if I came and use this, you're going to see it's not going to work. There's no database connected to it, right? So it's going to fail out right away and close out, which is what that, if you recall, inside that ping, which when I get the connection, get connection, it's going to do a ping, and it's going to fail out of my application if it cannot access it. So just you see this connection refuse. So, and there's just a couple commands here if you wanted to do this with curl. It shows you how to do it as well. So we're going to come back to showing how we can actually use it. So, but let's first set up the Docker image locally. So you copy this file. You want to reset the Docker ID here. Hopefully this runs a lot quicker this time. I'll see if I can push it. And see it's actually doing something, which is good. So it's going to start building it. And you're going to see when if you can kind of compare, you can kind of see it going through some of these commands. So right now it's just kind of setting it up. It looks like I can't actually contact the repo for it for some reason. Let me try one more time. Okay, so that's fine. Doesn't really matter for me as I already have this set up, but you know, in your case, if you didn't already have this set up, you would need these steps to work. But so you build the image and then you would push it. I'll see what happens if I try to push it. I already have the image running on my machine. But let's just see. If this works or not. And so I'll see if that works. I'll move on to the next step. So do you have a question maybe?
Of many of these business trends.
That sounds like somebody unmuted. Do you have a question? Give me a minute. Okay, so let's look at how we can run this locally. I guess maybe Docker is down. I'm going to start another terminal here. And copy all these commands. I got to change my Docker ID here. And so my Docker image started, which you kind of just do the Docker PS. I can see my image is running. And this time I use curl, but same thing's going to happen. It's going to error out. We can look at Docker PS again. And you can see the image closed itself. So what we can do to rectify this is we could either, where is it? I guess it says in here, I'm not really reading this, but if I go back and we can either use like the port forward feature of Kubernetes. So if I go back to the previous one and find that port forward. So what I can do is I have to switch back. Yeah, that won't work. Should have this in already. So if I turn the port forward on and then come back and try to run my command. So I'm going to go back now to the exercise that we're doing and scroll back down. So I can run it here. I'm not in the right folder. I don't have the parameter set on this instance. To see that what happens if you don't have the environment variable set, I output all of them, and it tells you the first one it's looking for is this host. It just tells you that it's not found. So I just specify those values, and now I should be able to run it. And now if I go back to this guy, so now I can actually run my code here. So it's actually referencing my deployment running on my Keema cluster here through my port forward. So I can do things like I could, in the browser, I could just specify a specific order that I want to look at, or I just look at all the orders. I could send like a post command or a delete command. They're all specified in there as well. And so you see, if I wanted to post data, I could use curl to do it, or I could use something like Postman. If I just paste that in there and then run the orders again, you can see now I have order 1,000,003 or whatever that value is. And so now I'll stop that. Actually, it's not on this one. So I'll stop that. And we already did the build and push, or at least tried to. So now if I want to run the Docker image on my machine, instead of me running the actual app and my code, I'll run the image. And same thing, this is going to use my port forward. Let me remove this name so I can set, or I could just start it. Oh. So now it should show in my list. So now you see it running. So this is going to have a different output because we're using a different version of it. So there you see that we have output coming from the Docker image. And so now if I just Docker stop my image name, it stops. And now if I come here again, it's not going to work anymore. So, okay, so we did this piece, stopped. I can just remove it. So then if I wanted to specify those parameters a different way, I could. And so now I'm going to start applying these resources to the Keema runtime. We already have the namespace. So we'll start with the deployment. And once again, if you are not using my version of this, you're going to come into your deployment and change this image name to use your ID. So I'll just apply that. I got to switch back to this guy. I didn't have the Cuba config set up on that terminal, so that's specific to the terminal that I'm using. So you can see here I applied that deployment and I created my deployment and a service. And then the next step is going to tell me to check if the pod is running. And you can see we have this error, create container config error. So let's look at why we have that. So we can look at the logs. So I can do dev. show you the command as I'm typing it. So we do logs for MS, or it's actually API. It should be logs. And then I need the container, which is the API msql-go. So I can look at the logs to see what I find in the logs. And we just see that same thing. Is waiting to start, create config or create container configure. So that doesn't really help me much. So now I could use that describe pod as well, or I could look at the pod itself, the YAML in it, which has the statuses. So I could do kubectl dash namespace dev API. That's not enough there. Doesn't want to autocomplete for me now. And I guess because I didn't put what I was trying to find. I want to get this pod. And I want to output its contents in YAML format. And so you can see in the statuses here that we get a message that the config map API MS-SQL is not found. So that's the reason why this pod is not starting, because we never applied there's a config map for it. So you can see here too, we see the same thing, config map API MS-SQL not found. And this thing's going to just keep restarting, or it's not even going to start, it's going to sit and waiting. And it's going to do that until we apply the config map, which is part of this this sample. So let's apply the config map. And you'll see that it's created. And now if I run the command to get the pods, you can see now that it's running. Go look here, now it's running here as well. So we look pretty good. And next thing we're going to do is apply this API rule. So let me just apply that. And then we'll take a look at it real quick. So what you see in here, so the API rule is what is allowing us to expose this outside of our cluster. So you could use it on the internet. And really what you specify here is just some of these properties down here. So the rules, and then the references to the service that you want to use, and what you want this API rule, how you're going to access it as well. So let's look at it in Keema by choosing configuration API rules. And you'll see the rule here. If I click on the name here, I'm going to see the same information that I was just looking at. And you'll see we have access strategy for orders. So these are the paths that we want to use. This drop down allows you to specify different authentication methods. I don't have any this no op, which is no operation. No operation and allow are kind of similar. It's just the way the header forwarding works is a little different. And then we also have inside of Keema, there's an OAuth server, so you can specify an OAuth 2 credential, or you could specify a JWT, which would then allow you to specify an issuer and then the keys URL for JWT. And you have different access strategies for the HTTP methods. So you see that the different ones that we have selected here. And you can add as many of these as you want. So you can keep adding them for different paths for your microservice that you're running. But I'm going to leave it alone. It's fine the way it is. If I just click on it, as I mentioned, there's no rule specified for the root, so that's not going to work. I have to specify orders to get my orders back. And there you see the orders that I have. And yeah, I could do the, as I mentioned, we have the different HTTP methods that are allowed. So I can do a put, post, get, and a delete on that path, but no other paths. Any other path that I specify, if I go back to the root, I'm just going to get an error. And so then there's a question asking me about why we had that container config error, and that's because the config map was missing. So we're now done this this part as well. So then we go back, and what's different on this one really is that we applied the API rule, and we also applied a config map, which has the information about how to connect to the database, the microservice running the database. So what the database name is, and what the the fully qualified service path is to that in the port. So as I mentioned, so this is the service name. This is the namespace that we're running in, dev. So once again, if you're not running in dev, you're going to have to change this value to match up to the namespace that you're running in. And so we're done that one. So we're going to move on to the front end piece of this. And it starts with the same stuff, explore. We'll go right down to explore the sample. I'm just going to clear some of this stuff out. Fine. So this is this front end. Let me minimize all these. Change my path here. And if we just look at the the contents again, we're going to have the Docker file. This one's just using this is just going to use Node.js to build this content, and then it's going to use Nginx to actually serve it. So you see those, if you're used to Node, this should be pretty or Node.js, this should be pretty similar to you. And maybe this is a little different, but this is similar to how we did the Golang one, where we had two different images. So we just build it and then use Nginx, because Nginx is going to start up a little quicker and be a little more less resource intensive. And we'll also have the K8 folder with the different resources. So once again, we're going to put another API rules, this front end application, a config map, and the deployment. Find there's a whole bunch of pieces in here related to the web app itself. So we have the web app folder, and this is a UI5 app. So there's a bunch of files in here that specify like the view here. So we have orders view, and it's just a XML file that defines a table and like the mapping of the data to the table. And then there's just various files in here for like Node.js and various other resources that are used. And as same as all the other ones, you have the README file as well to really understand the contents that exists and how to use this sample in different fashions. So the first thing you're going to do is run the npm install. I don't really need to do this, but I'll just do it anyway. Let's see if that takes a while too as well. And then this has, so we got to specify where the API exists here. So that's done in this web app. This config JSON. So going back to my Keema cluster, what I would do is just, I can pull out this part of the URL to it. So this is the cluster domain. And I could just reference or copy that in here. Same thing if I just wanted to copy out the API rule, there's a copy button here. If I just paste that below, you see it should be the same path. So I'm going to save that. And then I could just run it by running this command. It's going to auto open it for me. And you can see here my data. Here's my data. I could add another record in here. So I'll just put order 1 and description A, save it, refresh it. You can see that's there. I can edit this to A2. And I can delete it if I wanted to. So it's just a real basic sample just to kind of get an understanding of how you can use this stuff. So let's move back here. So now I'm going to stop that. And I'm just going to skip the build Docker image because it's not working for me today. But it's the same thing. You just change the Docker ID to your ID and then push it. And now I'm just going to apply the resources to the cluster here. So we have the API role, the config map, and the deployment. You have to modify the config map to be this value as well. So let me change that. Save it. And so I can apply that. Second, and I'll deploy deployment. And the same thing here, if I did this out of order and did the deployment first, it won't start because it won't find the config map. And now I'll do the API role. So I got the deployment and the service created, the config map, and now the API role. And this just tells you what the API role, what you would expect it to look like. Obviously, got to fill in the rest of the cluster value here. And then we can come and look at the API roles. We have it already here. So if I just click on that, and it might be still starting. So I can check that. Check the pod and see if I can get the logs to come up now. So there's something odd going on. There's another way you could look at the logs too, is on the main Keema screen, there's a logs entry, and this will take you to Grafana. I don't know why my internet is so slow though. But let me see, maybe I have a typo in this and it will show me here. I can't access that. What did I do wrong? Maybe it's just not fully loaded. See that network. I'm going to try to switch my network real quick to see if that helps. So I might disconnect for a second. Maybe Marco, you could keep them entertained for 1 minute. Okay. Sorry about this.
Sure. So are there any questions in the meantime? Well, We see if it disconnects.
Seems
JD,
like it's
looks
not
fine.
going to, but
Yeah.
I don't know if it's going to help or not, but maybe. There's too many people working from home, I think is the problem. This is painfully slow.
And I didn't have that problem. And actually your cluster is in East US, so that shouldn't be.
I'm wondering,
It
did I
seems at
do-
least the Europe AWS is at least not loading even for me. So I don't know if
Oh,
you're
really?
using that one.
It should.
know what
It's
you
actually on
provisioned on.
Azure, on Microsoft Azure. And then
Didn't specify anything wrong, did I? Oh yeah, I had the wrong. Well, that's not going to help. Let me fix. I had the config map set up wrong, I believe. So that's not the right path. Where is it? It's, okay, I'm gonna kill my browser.
I have a question in the meantime.
Sure.
How, if you would want to use another Keema, say for example, you have instances like a dev, test, and production setup, and how would you then move all these components across sub accounts? Would you do all these steps all over again in the next, for example, in a test or a production sub account, or are there some things that you can configure to do?
Well, you could configure, it depends on what resources that you use, but probably Daniel may be best to answer this kind of question, but you can use like a CI/CD type things. There's for like the functions on, if you're running serverless functions, which we really didn't cover, that you can have them tied to a Git repo. You could also have, just thinking of Git, you can build Git actions that do deployments for you, which would require you to set up a service account as well. But maybe
in general, you don't get around to setting up the basics for all environments. But once you're set up with applications, it's basically just applying kubectl commands where you update the applications that are already running. So once you have the basic setup done, and assuming you don't really change the whole landscape of the system, the overall steps for this setup would be a one-time thing, and then updating as you develop new features for your application would be minimal changes in the end.
Okay.
And then we're working as well with the Cloud Platform CI/CD team to enable that service to support as well Keema. So that's in our roadmap as well, to have the same service supporting all the runtimes within Cloud Platform.
Yeah, or if you're already running your own CI/CD, like a Jenkins or something that you use for deployments of applications, that works as well. or like Jamie said, if you are willing to do GitHub Actions on a private repository on github.com, or GitHub Enterprise, if you have GitHub Actions enabled there, that works as well. Like everything that can run commands to deploy containers somewhere is able to deploy to Keema as well, as long as you have connectivity to the cluster.
It still seems to be taking some time to load this. Is it, Marco or any of the other guys, have you tried accessing this? Is it the same for you?
I can only say for me, it's quite fast. I don't know what's the issue.
Maybe, do you want to share and then maybe I could just talk as you do it? Or we have 3 of the exercises done and we have the last 2 bonus ones that we could do. But my seems like my connection's
Okay.
not very effective right now. I do have this set up on this machine, so I could show it as well, maybe. Try this one. But what do you think? Yeah, it seems I'm the bottleneck right now. Unfortunately.
Sure.
It's like nothing's coming up.
Let's
switch to your
try
screen.
that. Let's try that. Let me just see if I have everything in place. But I mean, then for the mocks, it's quite easy. I mean, it's only about deploying the mocks, right? And then.
Yeah, just the mocks and then the event trigger.
Yeah, okay. Let me see just where I have the resources, and I hope that I never deleted that after I walked through them as well for TechEd.
How can you delete it?
Of course not. I have them here, of course.
I'd assume you're already on this. You're on that system, right? So that should be fine.
Yep.
I could also blame it on updating the Big Sur. Maybe that's the problem.
When did you do that?
2 weeks ago. Bad idea.
Just a second. I think I don't have the mocks anymore. Here we go, fetching them. You're catching me here on the spot. Give me 1 second. Okay. Should be good. So it's really just deploying the mocks, right, and then connecting that via management plane. So that's quite straightforward. All right, then. I guess I need to switch to my actually to the laptop screen. Otherwise, it will be just way too small.
Actually, finally got it to load.
Here we go. You want to continue, or should I? And now.
Let me try one more time. I
Okay.
plugged my computer in, get off the wireless. It's loading, but it's still pretty slow. So maybe you should just continue.
Okay. All right. Is it readable? Small enough? Big enough? Question to you, Jamie. Is it fine?
I can read it, but I have pretty good eyesight. But maybe it should make it a little bigger. It is small. I don't know what mine looks like for you, but.
All right, then let me just. Here we go. All right. So what we're going to do is like use this mocking framework to fake that there's a Commerce Cloud system actually connected, which enables you then to try out the full experience with regards to sending an event, calling back an API, and then saving information to the database, or like via the Go app. And Jamie, I mean, jump in at any point in time. So, I mean, what I did already is like I cloned the Git repo with the mocks. And so what I'm going to do is like apply one of the resources. So we've got 3 different systems, or the API and event definitions in there, like in the mocks, one for SAP Cloud for Customer, one for Commerce Cloud, and one for Marketing Cloud, so that you can try out those on your own, like, or in the different use cases, or even like across those different systems. So what I'm going to do is I'm deploying this application, which is mocking the whole, which is mocking the system. I would not do it like as it is described in dev, but probably isn't your tutorial following it like when it's deployed in mock, or doesn't matter in the end, right? I'm just connecting it via management plane.
Yeah, you can do it either or, but I think this does do it in dev, but don't quote me on that.
I can do it as well here. So I'll do it actually via the UI. So what you can do instead of going via the command line interface, what you can do as well, like on the overview page of the namespace, you can say, I want to deploy a new resource, and then you just browse for the YAML file. So that's here, this step. And then I'll just go to the commerce mock, and I need both, right? I need, yeah, first this one here. So
I think you're sharing the wrong screen, Marco.
I did see that you.
am I not just sharing the full screen?
Here we see your 3 different browser windows.
Yeah. Like the 2 browsers and the file, the finder. So yeah, so I'll deploy both. So one was the application, so the k8s.yaml, and the other one is directly the API rule, which is then exposing it to which is exposing the application. So I'll do that as well.
Marco, we don't see anything now. Okay, now it's loading up.
Okay, so it looks like it's really a bit jinxed the whole session, or at least towards the end.
I think my internet's working good now. As much.
Good.
Maybe it's Zoom that's doing the problem.
So again, so what it does is it's deploying a framework which is called Vargas. So it's something we created as well, and in this framework you can like upload API and event metadata, and then connect it as an application to the cloud platform, and therefore as well then make it show up in Keema. So you can even use your own definition files, like there's a description how to do that, and then you could try out connecting third-party applications to to Keema. I mean, in reality, this is not yet available, like connecting a third party or any application, but it would work then in the future. So we want to enable this, or we plan to enable this as well. So in the meantime, let's see if this is already available. Okay, so I'll just open up the application. Of course not. So it's still loading up. So that's the typical response that you get if it's not working yet. But
Can
what
you,
I would do then.
Could you open up the UI app just to prove that it's me that's the problem?
Oh, the
second one.
which one? This one here?
Yeah. Yep.
Here we go.
I think Zoom might actually be the problem because now it opens up for me in like a half a second.
Okay, so while that's loading, so let me already walk through the next steps for what I'm going to do. So in Cloud Platform, what you can do in the global account is you can connect systems so that they then later on appear in the Keema runtime. And you do this on a global account level so that you can reuse those systems in the future as well in other sub-accounts. What you first do is you do a representation of a system, and you can see here it's our like the account that we use as well for the walkthrough at TechEd, and I prepared as well several clusters here for today's session. So, but what I will do now is I will create a new representation of the system or the mocks that I'm about to create. So, and it's going to be of a type of Commerce Cloud. And so what this does is it registers the system in the so-called central management plane. So it's just a component here as part of the Cloud Platform Global account, and it generates a one-time token. And you can always like generate new tokens here, and you use this token then to paste it into the backend of the system you want to connect, which then does the handshake to the Keema runtime and all these things. So again, while it's still loading, so what I just do is already the next step. So after now, like creating this system representation in the global account, I have to group it now to the actual sub account. So this is called a formation. So what it does is what I do here is I select the sub account in which my Keema runtime is living, and then I select the system I just created, or this system representation, and I click on create. So this just pairs the system and the sub account. And even though, I mean, I haven't connected the system yet, you can see it here, it's still pending. I mean, creating the formation is already working. Now going back to the Keema runtime. So this is actually here, this one-time token, it's explained here, create a formation, and now pairing the application. So if I now go back, I hope that the application is now up and running.
It's definitely Zoom that's the problem. I guess we lost him.
Let's give him a minute.
Or Daniel, can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, we hear you, Jamie.
Let me let's see if I can go back to sharing.
You might try turning off your video if bandwidth is becoming an issue.
I'll just turn it off. You do see my screen?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, so let me get back. So this is what Marco was trying to open. So let me get back and get that key from the system. And he called it this walkthrough. So I'm going to copy this key. And to connect, I'm going to just choose this connect button, paste this token in here, and pray that we don't have any more issues. And that looks good. So you can see here now that it's connected to this cluster. What I'm going to do next is choose this register all. And this will take some time. So what it's going to do is it's going to start sending all the information in regards to these APIs here. So each separate one, it's going to send like an API spec in Swagger format. And you can see there's a whole bunch. So let me see, run this cluster here. We have the walkthrough. And you can see it's populating them in here. The one that we need is the event, so that's not showing yet. Let me see if we can refresh. So it's still doing them. But I don't have, let me see if we can open up the, trying to remember where I had this. Let me go back to this guy. So just to review, we did the resources, opened it, we created a system, the formation, and we just paired it. And so now we're just at this verify setup, and we're just looking for these last couple of things to be registered. And there they are. We see the events down here. So that's what we're going to use in the next part of the tutorial. So this one is now done. So now I'm going to come to this triggering a microservice with the event. And so this one's going to go back to this API MS SQL Go example. So I'm just going to clear this stuff out and go here. And what we're really going to look at is this event trigger. You can see in the tutorial, it just mentions some of the different properties in here, which you see here. And so I'll come back to that in a minute. So I'm going to just go ahead and bind the commerce mock to the namespace. So, and what that allows is basically us to use the resources from the system in that namespace. So I'm going to choose the dev namespace and choose create, and come back to my dev namespace. So now if I go into service management catalog, I'm going to see this is that system that MP walkthrough, which is what Marco named it. If I choose it, now I'm going to see all the different APIs and events that it has. Now, if I choose one of these, as I mentioned during the registration process, let me choose a better one. During the registration process, it publishes all the information in regards to the events. So you can see here the different APIs that we have here. So we have like this address one, for example. If I open this up, it would tell me what parameters are available to me to send to this, sample responses, and what the values of these responses would look like, and just a bunch of various information just to make life easier. if you're trying to develop against this, so you don't have to go anywhere externally to understand the API. It's all housed within Keema for you.
And I'm back actually, by the way. And this is really the live representation of the system that you connected. So it's not just pulling up the documentation, like all the documentation of events or APIs which are theoretically available, but especially, for example, in the case of commerce, you can add events, you can modify, or you can add APIs. So those, like this, will then show up here as well. So this is really a really nice way actually to consume those systems.
Yep. Okay, so we did the binding. And so now we're going to create a service instance, because what we want to do is we're basically going to tie the events that come from this mock application to the sample that we did in the previous tutorials. So in this one, it's showing it named as Commerce Mock, but we already had one named that, so Marco just named it Walkthrough. And so it's going to tell you to select that, you know, and now we're looking at the screen I just had up in this catalog. So let me go back again, choose the walkthrough. So we want events, and the same thing here. You have all the different events, and you can choose one and see what the payload looks like. So what I'm going to do is create a service instance of this, and that's basically going to allow me to utilize these events within this namespace. And it'll just give me a generated name. That's fine. I could put some labels in there if I wanted to, or parameters if I wanted to. I'm going to leave it as the default and click create. And so we'll see the same steps in here. So now I'm going to apply the trigger, but what we have to do first is let's go back and look at the trigger and take a look at the different values in here. So what happens when this trigger gets called? There's this endpoint on the API, this order code event, which was defined in this file to call this consume order code function. I close that. So what I need to do here, so this is fine. So once again, if you do this sample and you apply it to a different namespace and you're not using dev, you want to change that. So you see this URI is referencing this service name and then the namespace and then the endpoint here, which we have as order code event. And we're going to listen for this order created event with the version of V1. And the source, this source is matching with the tutorial is set up to use, but you know, in the case here, if you remember, we have it as MP walkthrough. So we want to change it, the source to MP walkthrough and save it. So just in, you know, in your case, if you change the system name, you want to make sure that you change that as well. So you can see here that, you know, we're just going to apply this trigger. And I have to change what file path I'm in. And I'm going to apply that. And you can see that it got created. And then we can copy this next command and run that. And what we're looking for are these statuses. So you can see them here as well. So we want to make sure all these different pieces are ready, the broker, the dependencies, and then it's subscribed. And so you can see here that it looks like everything is good to go. And next we're going to just test it. So we're going to come back into the mock application, choose the remote APIs, and find the events in here. Just getting scared for a second. And I'm going to use this order created event because this is what is tied to in this trigger. So it's looking for order created in version 1. And I could specify any number here. I could just leave the default value. I'm going to click send event. And I don't remember what one I'm on. So let me just go back here, go into my API roles and open up my example here. And you can see here that I sent this 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And now I have it in here as the order ID. Shows that I received it from event at this time. And if I wanted to do one more, I'll just put it as 34, send it. And you see it sent successfully again. If I refresh this, and there's the 34. And that is the completion of this tutorial group. So you can find, you have access to that Git repo, and all this stuff is just in the tutorial navigator. So if you came into developers.sap.com tutorials, I'll just change my URL real quick. Okay, it doesn't like that. Go to all tutorials. And you just search for Keema. And what we're doing is some of these tutorials on here. So a couple from one. There's 2 different missions in here, but we're using content from both of them in this sample. But this is the whole collection of everything that's available.
Cool. So we're just in time by walking through it, even though we had some hiccups with the connection. It actually completely disconnected me from the internet for a second. Thanks for walking through that. And as an outlook, so we are just working on a tutorial to deploy CAP-based applications into Keema runtime, so that we have that angle there as well. And of course, as I already said, we're working on making more services from Cloud Platform consumable from within Keema, or making them usable with Keema, like the CI/CD service and others. Yeah, I think we'll just see more and more news about Keema in the future.
Yeah, and the Git repo that we have that we're using for these samples, there's all kinds of different ones in there. If you have any feedback, please leave it there, or you can put feedback in the tutorial navigator as well. So we'd appreciate any comments or thoughts that you have.
Exactly. So on the one hand, the dev261 repo, there you can create issues or like leave feedback. And then I shared as well in the link the SAP samples or the Keema samples from SAP samples on GitHub, where you find as well more examples from different languages or with using different languages, so that yeah, you can just look at it from different angles. So it's not only about Go, it's actually independent of any language that you want to use. All right, so we're just on time. Helena, you want to close it off then?
Sure. Thank you so much for showing us how to get these exercises done. And apologies for all the little technical difficulties that we had this morning, but you guys were able to sort it out really quickly. So thank you very much for that. The recording of this session will be posted in the community shortly. Give it a day maybe. And I put the link to the TechEd page in the community where we're going to be posting the recordings. You may also find them in the community YouTube channel. With that, thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.